All right, welcome to the stock market recap for Monday, June 2nd. It's the first trading day of the month, and we started off with quite the move on the indexes. So, first, we'll go over indexes, take a look at some of the ETFs leading and lagging, go over the nine stocks that I have on my leaders list, along with a review of some stocks that we covered on Sunday's live stream and some stocks to watch for tomorrow. So, first, we have QQQ. Great action following Friday's shakeout and closed back above the 5-day EMA. Today, we opened a little bit lower at the 10-day EMA, but rallied to close right at the high of the day. We also closed over a gap down zone from the 19th to the 20th, so I've already eliminated that, but really strong action. New closing high in this rally, and after a couple of weeks tightening up here, maybe it's time that we get going again. SPY, a little bit weaker overall. We are still eating into the first resistance gap here. We have one other gap down from the high from the 19th to the 20th, but overall similar action to the NASDAQ. Shakeout on Friday through the 10-day EMA, higher highs, higher lows, overall great action. We stay above the 200-day moving average, stay above the 20-day EMA here. Can't ask for too much more than that. IWO, this is the growth ETF, the Russell 2000. Great action today. We undercut Friday's low, undercut the 20-day EMA, undercut the support gap low here, and then we rally back through all of those, closing back over the 5 and the 10-day moving average. Still slightly weaker than the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 because we're trading under that 200-day moving average, but overall, above the 20-day, can't complain. ARKK, higher highs, higher lows, closed over all the key moving averages today. The 50-day still under that 200-day, and overall just some general weakness compared to some other ETFs and some other indexes. Closed back above the 5-day, like I said, and put in potentially a higher low here against the 20-day EMA. Next, we have Bitcoin. This isn't doing anything wrong in my eyes. Some slight relative weakness compared to the market lately, but we did just rally and make new highs. Now we're pulling into the 20-day EMA in a really controlled manner, not a ton of volatility, just every day, just a little bit of a pullback. If the market's going to break, well, it moved into new highs with the rally, but or from the rally. But if we're really going to see the market confirm that uptrend after a couple of weeks of consolidation, I expect Bitcoin to kind of get supported at the 20-day and then push through the 5 and 10. And we'll cover some ETF and some individual stocks related to crypto in a little bit. So those are the indexes. Next, we'll go to the ETFs. I'm not going to cover every single ETF because this is just the daily recap. We'll cover every ETF in the weekly recaps and the weekly prep, but did want to cover a couple here. So GDX, that was the leader today. I've got this organized from strongest action today to the weakest. GDX is something that we covered on Thursday's stream and on Sunday's stream, where we undercut the 50-day moving average for a couple days, gapped back up through it, pushed through the 10 and 20-day EMAs, and then paused right where we had previous resistance, which is completely healthy action. Followed it up by a strong move on Friday, opening on the low of the day, right at the 10-day EMA, closing back through the 5-day. And then today, you can see we gapped up, really strong gap up, opened on the low again, closed at the high of the day, and a new all-time high here for GDX. So gold is definitely a theme to be watching. XME is the metals and mining. So that just kind of precious metals theme is something to be focused on. XBI, this is the biotech ETF, continues to trip me up a little bit. I thought it was going to break down going into Thursday because we closed below the key moving averages here. We shook out that low, closed well, or that was Wednesday, closed well on Thursday. Then we gapped down on Friday and had some relative weakness. Today, the opposite is true again, where we gap up, take out Thursday's high, close into this resistance gap. And if the market does kind of turn up here after a couple weeks of consolidation, maybe biotechs get going again. BLOK, that's the ETF that I'm using. It's for blockchain slash crypto. Uh, Potentially putting in a higher low here on Friday's action. Nice move to the 5-day EMA, but overall, this is just a consolidation after making new highs here. And if we take out today's high, that could be your entry with a stop at Friday's low or the 20-day EMA. Get some exposure in that group. SMH is the semiconductor ETF. That's one that I keep track of every single day. Good shakeout on Friday through the 200-day moving average, through the 20-day EMA, and then closed in the upper half of the daily range. Today, we opened on the low, closed on the high, and ate into that resistance gap from the Thursday to Friday move. And overall, semiconductors acting relatively well today after that kind of sell the news event on NVIDIA's earnings. As long as this holds the 20-day EMA, that's going to be bullish for the market and bullish for a lot of the growth stocks that I look at. Another ETF I wanted to cover was cyber. This is a leading theme in the market, cybersecurity. We'll go over some of the stocks within that group in a little bit here, but new closing high above the 5 and 10 EMAs, just trending nicely. CrowdStrike does have their earnings tomorrow after the close, so maybe that shakes things up a bit, but for now, it's acting incredible. ITA, that's the aerospace and defense ETF, one of the first stocks to get going into new highs again. When did it make new highs? On May 2nd. And since then, you can see it's just riding the 5-day higher. Any corrective action gets supported at the 10-day EMA. And now we made another new high today. IGV software ETF, a little bit weaker than the cybersecurity, but overall just a leading group in the market and kind of a risk on, risk off theme for me. And today closed back above the 5-day EMA, just consolidating well, letting the 20-day EMA catch up, not doing anything wrong. The weakest two ETFs have been pretty weak historically, or not historically, but lately. ITB, that's the home builder ETF. Today we had a gap down that didn't close, but we did undercut the support gap low, shook out and have a hammer candle close right here. That's relatively strong action. If that can be the low of this pullback and we get going again, that would be overall good for the market, but still not a group that I'm going to be focused on or any individual stocks within that group. I don't think is really worth focusing on. And then TAN, this is the solar ETF. I always think it's funny because I treat this as an inverse to the rest of the market. When solar is doing well, it's probably time for the market to pull back. And when solar takes a breather, the market tends to rip. And of course, we had a great day in the market today, and solar was our weakest ETF. Next, we'll go to our 9 leaders. I post this on Twitter or X every single day, just a quick recap of these, but we'll go through these in detail in these videos as well. And with how strong the market's been, you could have 12, 15, almost 20 leaders, but I narrowed it down to 9. You can make an argument for a whole separate 9, and I wouldn't argue with you there, but we'll just go one by one here. It's got CrowdStrike. Again, they're reporting earnings tomorrow after the close, but for today, new closing high, bounced off that 10-day support gap area on Thursday's pullback. Just great overall action from the liquid leader from a leading group. Next, we have CRWV. This has been the strongest IPO in the market. Continues to hold that 5-day EMA. Had one day where we closed below it on volume, which was a little like potentially could have been the top. Maybe it is the top. Um, but the fact that uh, we followed it up with a quick shake under that low and then a close back over the 5-day EMA of 5% on Friday, and then another gap up and strong close today up 8%. I still think that this has room to run. Whether we need to consolidate a little bit more here, let the 10-day catch up to this gap zone, and then we get going, or if we're really just pressing the pedal down in this risk on environment. And maybe this is the start of a blow off top. We have your first unfilled gap to the upside after kind of corrective action on Thursday last week. Typically, with a blow off top, you want to see 2 to 3 unfilled gaps to the upside in overwhelming volume. I thought we might be getting that here, but with this kind of pullback, I think that resets the deck here. So maybe this is our first gap up of the kind of blow off top, but I still think this has room to run. And until you get a true blow off top or a close under the 5-day EMA on volume that follows through to the downside, not like what we had on the 29th. Um, Still in a risk on environment. Carvana, another great indicator of the risk on versus risk off in the market. This has been a monster stock. Go back and study this. It has gone from $4 up to $331. It's near all-time highs again. Just rides that 5-day EMA well. Any corrective action gets supported at the 10-day, and now we're closing at another 52-week high. GEV, not quite a new 52-week high, but closed right on it, basically. Great action. Not going to cover that in more detail. Hood, Robinhood, overall, maybe one of the strongest stocks, maybe the strongest stock in the market. I don't know. You can make so many arguments for it, but love the action on Friday, undercutting the 10-day and the support gap, then closing at the high of the day, up 3.4%. Followed it with higher highs, higher lows, up another 2.8%. Until we close under Friday's low, I still think that this is going to be heading higher. Netflix, similar action to Hood, quick test of that support gap under the 10-day EMA, new closing highs, just trending super well. Palantir, higher highs, higher lows, kind of a doji close today, only up 0.17%, but still new all-time highs, so can't complain there. Great action on Friday through the 5 and the 10 EMA, closing above two gap down zones that you don't see anymore because we've closed over them. Roblox, a little bit thinner of a name out of the leaders, but has been a monster stock. Got supported at the 200-day moving average with the support gap. Got through the 50-day moving average on the 22nd of April, and since then has just been riding that 5-day higher on the uptrends. Corrective action getting supported at the 10-day. That's exactly what you see out of leaders. If you study them, going go back as far as you can, you'll see that type of price action. So Roblox obviously being accumulated, definitely extended in the short term here. It could get more extended. I'm not trying to short this or much in the market at this point. But if we do kind of pull back into this gap zone, allow that 20-day EMA to catch up, that's an area where I would look to add to the stock. And then finally, we have ZS, another cybersecurity stock that took off on Friday into new 52-week highs, up 9.8% on earnings, closed right at the high of the day. Today, slight gap up over that HVC, the high volume close, opened on the low, closed on the high, another sign of huge accumulation. And again, you have the leading theme, you have a stock that's been in an uptrend before earnings, great action after earnings, obviously being accumulated. Now we'll switch to just 25 stocks that I wanted to cover for potential setups. We covered CRWD. I think you could buy that. My game plan with this is if we get a break of Friday's high, or sorry, today's high, Monday's high, I'm going to be playing that and using an intraday stop or a stop at the volume weighted average price VWAP, just to try to play for this parabolic move higher. And then if I get stopped out, I get stopped out. But I've studied enough of these moves to know when you get a reversal bar like this that doesn't follow through to the downside, it it has a real chance to go a lot higher. So I definitely want to play that. But again, intraday stops, a little bit smaller position sizing, not expecting as much as if you got in at a more proper buy point. CEP, we covered this on the live stream on Sunday. I thought it was a potential long or short, depending on how we opened up. And I actually did short this on the gap down. We gapped down, and I right at the open, I hit some short, instantly got stopped out for a 2% loss. I'll take that because this is a stock that went from $10 up to $58. Doesn't actually do anything. I think it's a SPAC. So again, we're in a speculative market. You could play these to the long side or the short side, but today's action just shows you that this is still a risk on market. And I think with this, if we do open down slightly and then take out today's high, that could be an entry point. But again, this is a more speculative name. I'm going to be sizing way down when trading this. WPM, just wanted to highlight this because we covered it on Sunday as the kind of the gold stock or precious metal stock that we wanted to get into. Good action on the 5-day EMA and the support gap as it pulled back, and then we popped into highs today, up 5.9%. SEZL, this has been a monster stock lately. I haven't gone through and drawn all the gaps just yet, but pulled back into the 10-day on Friday, held that support today. Ideally, we get a little bit of a push and then come back into the zone. And then I would take an entry at that 10-day EMA support gap versus the low of Friday. So about a 1.5% risk there. We're getting, it's kind of tough to buy stuff like this later on in the move. But that's why I tend to buy it on weakness and on a shakeout where I can manage my risk really tight against a low of day. QBTS, this is another monster stock. I really thought this was just kind of speculative trash. Maybe it is in the end, but who knows? Really good action when we got to previous highs, tight into the 5-day EMA. Then we rallied into new highs again, pulled back into the 10-day, had a good shakeout and strong close today. This is one where I want to see if the market does kind of have a 1 or 2 day pullback, if we can shake into this $20 or 20-day EMA area as a potential entry. I probably won't take this on strength, but I think as long as you use like today's low as your stop, you could take it through today's high as an entry. Dave, this is similar to SEZL, where it made a big move on earnings, pulled back to the 10-day once and got supported. I basically just want to see that support gap hold or on a closing basis. An undercut and reclaim of that is a buy point versus the low of the day on Friday. But again, not like a super proper setup. SFM, we covered this again on Sunday. Really nice VCP setup, volatility contraction pattern, where you get big pullback, shorter pullback, quick 1 day shakeout. And then today we gap up, open on the low, close on the high of the day at new highs. Just a monster stock and a good one to study overall if you're a trend follower. KTOS, this one has two gap up zones that I'll be watching. Undercut of the 5-day in the first one at 36.90. It's a potential entry, but if it needs more time and shakes out to the 20-day and the support gap at 36, that's kind of where I would size it up a little bit more. CRDO, we should bring up a second chart here because it's up big after hours, reported earnings, and is trading in the $70 area. So if I zoom out, trading up here right now. Plan for myself tomorrow is just use an opening range break to get some exposure into this because I don't have much semiconductor exposure right now. Want to get a little bit on in case that group starts to turn up after the NVIDIA shakeout. Hood, we covered super strong. Looking just for a pullback in that support gap to add on. GEV, similar to Dave and Sezzle or SEZL, where if we just pull into the 10-day support gap, it's a little wedged up here. So honestly, probably not going to take that trade, but just wanted to put that on people's radar. Snowflake, great action again. Today, up another 2%. We continue to rally into this gap down zone from, whoops, down from the previous earnings. Let me refresh that chart. Sorry about that. We keep eating into this gap down from a previous earnings back at the beginning of 2024, but overall acting great. Again, just looking for a pullback to that 10-day support gap and $200. If we can undercut that and reclaim that area, that would be my entry versus like the low of the day two at 197.50. CRS support gap at the 20-day EMA. We have not tested the 20-day since we started this break. So whenever you initially test a 20-day moving average after making new highs, especially when it lines up to with a support gap, that tends to be a good risk return area to get in. Toast, we've been covering this for a while. This was my pick on the Wolf Financial show today. Great shakeout of the 20-day EMA on Friday, right into the HVC area and the gap from earnings. This has got a beautiful double bottom base, shook out the 200-day moving average, really clearing out the deck and creating another wave of potential buyers. If the market needs more time to consolidate and this comes back into that HVC $20 or 20 EMA support gap zone, perfect. Start loading up there versus $40 as a stop. Otherwise, just through today's high and then a stop at the 20-day. It's a little bit wider than I would like, but it could work. NRG continues to just consolidate under this resistance gap above the 10-day EMA. Great move after earnings, not doing anything wrong. This is in that AI energy type space. MSTR, this is another crypto related stock that, I mean, if you've been following crypto, you know what MSTR is. Relative weakness before Bitcoin even topped, which is why I would be buying this on weakness versus on strength. We're really tight into the 5-day EMA here. I'm looking for another shakeout into the 50-day moving average, into this gap zone, into 350 as a potential shakeout area. Then I would just use the stop as whatever the low of the day is on that day. Tim's a little bit of resistance today, finished flat, but tried to get over this resistance gap. Couldn't do that. So maybe we need more time chopping through this. Pulling back into the 20-day and the support gap would be a secondary entry point. SMR, a little bit weaker than I would have liked to see today with that nuclear theme, but another one with a really nice double bottom base, just kind of working on the handle, kind of like toast. So if it needs more time to let the 10-day catch up, let the 20-day catch up, so be it. But if it comes into the 10-day and the HVC area right around 30.30, that could be a spot where you try some versus the low of the day two, which was 29.43. OKLO, a little bit stronger within that same group. So my focus tomorrow will be OKLO versus SMR. Opened on the low on Friday, closed back over the 5-day. Great sign of accumulation there. And then today, inside day, again, another close over the 5-day. This, if we do get a shakeout to the HVC, that's an entry point versus the 10-day EMA. Or if we take out today's high, then I'll just be using today's low as my stop. Tesla gave an awesome entry point. So I wanted to take just a minute to go over that with you. So this is a stock that's had multiple gap ups, a lot of accumulation off the bottom here. Got through the 200-day moving average, rallied up, pulled into the 10-day, into the support gap, and held this on a closing basis. Now, everyone else is going to close out this gap zone because we traded through it on an intraday time frame, but I only close the gaps on my chart if it closes on a closing basis. The reason I'll do that is by the end of the day, when institutions have to make their final decisions, you'll see the price action move, right? So institutions can trade the first hour of the day and the last hour. That's where the most liquidity is. So if they can still trade at the end of the day, I want to give it till the end of the day to see what they're doing. And Tesla, perfect action. If we switch to like even a 1 minute chart on this, um, perfect action today. We had a initial rally, shook out the first support gap, mini rally up, and then it's really the second shakeout that was the buy point. You saw the highest volume since like the first 30 minutes of the day on the undercut of this support gap. We shook it out just by one candle, and then we recapture the low of the support gap. Now, for me, that's my entry tactic. So buy as it comes back through the support gap. Your stop is the low of that move. So you have like less than 0.5% risk on the trade. And if it works, you have a great spot where you could really size up because your stop loss is so tight. And if it works, you're going to get multiples of your risk on the trade. And if it doesn't work, you get stopped out for 0.5%. This one worked extremely well, started to move back through that moving average. We'll go to the daily. So still kind of have those two support gaps because we didn't close under them. But after that kind of shakeout, ideally we get a gap up and we start going for Tesla. EVLV, this is in that kind of crypto related field that's on watch. Another low volume shakeout today of the previous day's lows. I'll just be looking through the 10-day and the HVC level at 546 as a potential entry, and then stop at today's low. AEVA, High type flag in the making, did have an unfilled gap down today, which isn't ideal, but on lower volume, down 5%. Just looking for a break over Friday's high as a potential entry, and then a stop at whatever the low of the day is when we do make that move. PONY, this was another good trade for me today. Well, first off, from a move from $4 to $20, massive, massive move. Then we're only pulling back about 15% from the highs here. So not technically a high type flag because you have all this supply to the left of it, but measuring wise, just a ton of power, nice consolidation. And today shook out that support gap just by a couple pennies and immediately responded to that level. I was buying as it got back through the 20-day EMA. Didn't get filled perfectly because if we switch to a 1 minute chart, you can see just how quickly the reaction was to that move. Just a couple bars down, 1 minute wick, and it came all the way back through. So I got filled at like 1690. It wasn't ideal, but size it lower anyway because it's a super high ADR name. But that's the area that you want to try to get in some of these names because your stop is going to be so tight, just the low of that pullback. If it works, it's going to work really well for your risk adjusted returns. Two more for you. MDST. This is another like highly speculative name, kind of with the QBTS. Nice base here. Broke out on volume, pulling back on lower volume to the 10-day EMA. Just looking to play this through today's high with a stop at today's low. And finally, we have GRRR. This has been showing relative weakness the entire way, but the type of market that we're in right now is we're just seeing continued rotation into more and more risky assets. And until that stops, I think you just find a stock that's been setting up, that's gotten tight, play an opening range break, play a break over a previous day's high, something like that, and manage your risk accordingly. Now, if this breaks to the downside, then that's a great signal that, hey, this was a proper setup for a super risky stock that's starting to break to the downside. Maybe it's time that we take our foot off the pedal, start to play a little bit more defense. And you can play this on the short side too. If we gap down, opening range break to the downside, because it's had relative weakness this entire move down, then if the market is turning to the downside and you have something that hasn't bounced much, you're going to have a nice entry point for a real pullback there. So that's the market recap. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Otherwise, just leave a like and a comment on what stocks you're watching if you're watching this on X. Thanks. Bye.